good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, at whatever time it is. Thank you for joining us for this next online worship video from First Parish Church of Kingston, Massachusetts. I am the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson. I serve this church as its minister. I use she, her pronouns, and I am so glad to have you with us as we continue to create and recreate community in this new way, in this strange time. Please join with me now in singing our introit. What we need is here, because it is still true, even amidst all that is different, that what we most need is here with us. Our compassion, our inner strength, our courage, our love, and our vision for a world made whole. In that spirit, please join with me in singing. If you have a chalice or a candle or the Worship Web app, whatever it is that you have available to you, please join with me in kindling a flame. In this time, we pause and we create many points of light everywhere that we are. Every time we stop to remember what it is that we dream of for this world, who we are connected to, and what we are grateful for. All these points make a constellation of love and justice and joy, even now. We are grateful too to be alive in this beautiful world, to be celebrating the coming of spring. Please join with me in singing hymn number 175. We celebrate the web of life.
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing, for we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole in cactus and in quail, as much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land, and air which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Hi, Reverend Monica.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Ellery.
I'm here with Ellery, and he wanted to show you something that he drew this week.
Oh, good. I'd love to see it. Ellery, what a nice drawing. That looks like our church.
It is the church.
Oh, Ellery, I wonder if you drew that because you were missing church and so you thought you'd make a picture that you could have with you.
That's true. We went to church last Saturday. He was really missing church a lot, and I had to get a book that I had in my office. And he said, "Can I come and can we just sit outside of there for a little while? Because I'm starting to forget what the church looks like, and that it feels really sad and scary that I'm forgetting. So I just want to make sure that the church is okay."
Mhm.
So we went and we sat, and then he told me that while we were there, he was remembering it so that he could draw this picture.
Mhm.
So we can have church with us all the time. So now we do. Usually it's in our kitchen.
What a good idea. I'm glad you have a picture of the church with you all the time.
And doesn't it look just like the church?
It's great. I like the steeple and the bell and the trees around the outside.
Yeah, I really love it. And that day was not a sunny day, but I like how he made it a sunny day.
Yeah. I wonder, Ellery, if you were remembering things about church that are really special to you. Like if you sit inside and you look out the windows and you can see the trees, and that makes you feel kind of peaceful and connected to the earth. And so you did a good job drawing the trees outside the building. And maybe you remembered sitting inside and seeing those trees.
I think that's probably true. And we were talking about other things about church that were important. Like on Saturday, when we were at church, we were talking about the things that we really miss about church. And one of the things that we were talking about that we really miss is coffee hour.
Oh,
Connecting with our friends and having the special treats that we always have there. And, you know, just having that special time to connect with others.
I think a lot of people are missing that right now. Missing a chance to get together, missing a chance to get to eat together, which is really special and important for a lot of people's friendships. I think that's something that a lot of people feel sad that they can't do right now.
Yeah. So we had kind of talked about, well, is there something that we can do at home to give us that feeling of connecting and getting to have a special treat? And we came up with this idea of having treats together and having a conversation that's like a conversation that we might have at church.
That's such a great idea. You figured out what you could have that was similar to what you were missing, even though you can't do the thing that you miss right now. And I think we could even all bake special treats in our homes and then eat them while we're having a conversation with somebody. So even though we can't sit at the same table in the same room right now, we could still get to have the experience of eating and chatting and even video chatting so we can see each other. Because really, I think what we're missing is the feeling of being really connected to people. And we know that there are lots of ways to connect with people. And sometimes it means being a little bit brave and calling up somebody you wouldn't normally call to say, hey, I miss seeing you at coffee hour every week. I feel like we were starting to become friends and maybe we could still keep becoming friends now. What if we had a Zoom date and I make brownies at my house and you make brownies at your house and then we eat them while we Zoom together?
That's such a good idea. I love that.
This is a time when we're having to reimagine a lot of how we do things. And it requires us to do what Ellery did, to draw a picture or have a conversation to help us think about what is it that we're really missing and how can we do it in a new way. And actually, that's always the work of being human and alive in the world, is having to learn new ways to do things because we grow and change and the world grows and changes. It's just happening really fast right now. So Ellery, I'm so glad that you and Jen and I could have a conversation about noticing what's important to us and figuring out how to honor what's important and how to do things in a new way during this strange time.
Me too.
In these times, it is good for us to remember that we must choose our guides carefully as the Reverend Rebecca Parker teaches us. So we pause now to light our candles of witness. We know that our task as religious people is to be awake and aware and alive to what is guiding us as we make our choices. We know that it would be so terribly easy to simply follow the call of fear and despair. But we know that fear and despair will not lead us to the world that we want to build for us and for all that lives. We know that there is so much suffering in the world now. We know that there are so many losses, from small daily pleasures which are missing to the end of lives, people whom we grieve. And we are called to practice facing our grief, breathing through it, not turning away, but simply being in it until love arises again alongside, because all grief is rooted in love. When love comes alongside grief, it opens the door to the compassion we need for ourselves and for others. We will light this white candle for our grief and for our compassion. And we are guided also in these times by the fact that with our choices, we help recreate the world. Our choices are not always easy. They are never perfect. Still, we know that we can choose to share what we have, to help our neighbors, to ask for and accept help when we need it ourselves, and to use every opportunity to lift our voices to advocate for those who are the most vulnerable, to talk to elected officials, to give money to nonprofits doing good work, to write letters, to have conversations, to open minds. These acts recreate the world each day. They require commitment, and they require courage. So we will light this red candle. A symbol of our continued commitment and of the truth that we have the courage we need in and amongst all of us, that we share that strength with each other in these times. Our grief and our compassion, our commitment and our courage, may these be our guides. Please join with me in singing hymn number 7, The Leaf Unfurling.
The leaf unfurling in the April air, the newborn child, the loving parent's care, these constant common miracles we share. Alleluia, alleluia. All life is one, a single branching tree, all pain a part of human nature. joy and sorrow ring. No one can know what the next hour will bring. We cry, we love, we mourn, and still we sing. Alleluia, alleluia.
In this time of creating community at a distance, we gather on Zoom to share our personal joys and sorrows. At this time, I will light these candles, red for love and courage, and gold for gratitude and blessing. A red candle for all the healthcare providers who are risking their own safety to help and to heal, and all the essential workers who are bringing us what we need and making spaces cleaner and safer. A red candle for everyone who is vulnerable because of their circumstances. People who are unhoused, imprisoned, undocumented, or at risk because of the people with whom they shelter. A red candle for all those for whom this is a hard day, who are struggling with financial insecurity, with mental illness, with despair. We hold them and hope that they can hold on to find a new day. And a red candle for all those who grieve, whose burdens of pain and loss are heavy today. We send our love and our wishes for courage to live into one more new day, and then one more. A gold candle for all the leaders, from the national to the local levels, from large corporations to small businesses, all the leaders who are making the best choices they can for the good of as many people as possible. A gold candle for the work of scientists all over the world, racing to understand this virus, to create tests and treatments and vaccines. A gold candle for artists and creators who offer us music and stories and words and art to sustain our spirits, and for teachers who continue to make connections with their students and from those students to the greater knowledge of the world. A gold candle for all the generous people sharing what they have, offering resources and donating to food banks and making masks and gowns and shields and so much of what is needed. A gold candle for the truth of spring, which reminds us every year what it means to recreate this beautiful, fragile world. And a gold candle for love, which is present now with us, in us, and through us. With every breath, may more love come into this world.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
Our reading today is a poem by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt. It is titled Only the Beginning, and it takes place just after the Israelites have left Egypt, after the parting of the sea, after the escape from the armies of the Pharaoh, after the end of that time of slavery, when the Israelites realized that now they would have to journey through the desert, through the unknown, in order to reach the promised land of fulfillment. Coming through the sea was only the beginning. The giddiness of walking through walls of living water, but the story doesn't end there. Now it's desert without a map. What if the next 40 years are bone dry and desolate? Maybe it wasn't so bad, that life, numb and familiar. Cucumbers and fish fresh from the Nile. Certainty, a fixed path. Now, hope unfolds its mighty wings, and every step risks failure. When I falter, remind me, I didn't cross the sea alone. Remind me, there's a mountain I'm heading toward, a promise of becoming together that spans lifetimes. Maybe you watched Alicia Keys on CNN on Thursday night. She debuted her new song, Good Job, a tribute to all the essential workers who so often go unnoticed and undervalued, but whose work is a necessary part of the fabric of our society. After the song, she lifted up the truth that those essential workers are disproportionately Black and brown folks, people of color who overwhelmingly do some of the hardest and least valued jobs in our society. Driving deliveries and stocking shelves, cleaning, operating public transit vehicles, nursing, and doing other service professions, which we know now are vital. She lifted up too that Black and brown folks are disproportionately affected by COVID-19 because of the systemic impact of less access to health care, to good food, to safe places to live. She said, I feel like it's time for America to be reborn. She called on all of us to be asking ourselves, who do we want to become out of this? The last thing we all want is to go back to whatever was. It's time to go forward. It's an opportunity to see each other for who we actually are and to change the narrative. To see each other for who we actually are. To see the world as it truly is. To change the narrative. There have been a lot of apocalypse references on my social media feed these last 6 weeks, in part because for many people this has felt like a kind of end of the world, and that's what most people use apocalypse to mean. But the Greek word apocalypse means revelation, or, more precisely, an unveiling or unfolding of things not previously known and which could not be known apart from the unveiling. I've seen that definition at work as, again and again over the last few years, movements have come to a head, and those with certain identities have come to understand truths about the world that had been hidden from them before. Those of us who are white have been learning about systemic racism and its impacts on those of us who are people of color. Those of us who are men have been learning about systemic misogyny and its impacts on those of us who are women. Those of us who are cisgendered have been learning about transphobia and its impacts on those of us who are trans. Those of us who are currently able-bodied have been learning about ableism and its impacts on those of us who are disabled. Those of us who are straight have been learning about homophobia and heterosexism and their impacts on those of us who are queer, and so on, across every identity, adding in the impacts of systemic and generational poverty, the exploitation of late-stage capitalism in which we find ourselves. And also, those of us who have been comfortably insulated from the real consequences of climate change have been learning about its impacts on everything that lives. It's been a hard time to be alive in the world. Now, some of us already knew some of these things, of course. Those of us who are people of color already knew systemic racism was everywhere. Those of us who are women already knew misogyny was pervasive. Those of us who are trans already knew transphobia was widespread. But lately, we've had a lot of apocalyptic events here in the US, when the reality of oppression and exploitation is unveiled more widely. And there's always more to know. More unveiling will come. It's so tempting to try to go back and unknow these things. The old stories were comfortable, even if they weren't particularly life-giving. Those old stories that said that certain people, usually white, straight, able-bodied, cis men, just happen to be better at succeeding, and who could blame them for just somehow always being better? Those old stories that said that the richest people deserve to be rich, that they drive the economy, that if everyone else could just be patient, eventually the resources would trickle down and be shared. Those old stories didn't demand very much of us in terms of recreating the world. They just put everyone in their box, following their script, staying separate, only concerned with their own survival and success, and maybe that of some family members. It is time for a new story. This week, I read Glennon Doyle's new memoir, Untamed. She writes about her experiences getting sober, understanding that her marriage to the father of her children was coming to an end, and that her marriage and her love with the woman who is now her wife was beginning. She writes about raising her daughters to know that they can be brave and strong and confident and still be girls, and raising her son to know that he can be tender and vulnerable and uncertain and still be a boy. She says that when people write to her for advice, she writes back, "What is the truest and most beautiful story you could tell about your life?" The truest and most beautiful story that you can imagine. As the book unfolds, she writes about how our practice in imagining the truest and most beautiful stories we can about our own lives, in doing that, we build the skills we need to imagine the truest and most beautiful story we can about our collective life. I have been doing a lot of webinar learning during this time, including the Transforming Hearts Collective webinar about inclusion of trans folks in Unitarian Universalist congregations. This webinar, led by two UU religious professionals who are trans, talks about different cultures and their assumptions about the way life works. Mainstream, white, straight American culture is focused on individuals who rise or fall all on their own. You might feel sad for someone else's misfortune, but how much does that culture teach you to risk in order to help them out? Whereas queer culture has much more focus on interdependence, on community resilience, on living with the truth that all of us are sometimes in a precarious position and sometimes in a fortunate position, and somehow together, between all of us, there is always enough to share. My friend Gretchen, one of the owners of A Room of One's Own LGBTQ bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin, was quoted earlier this month about their vision for what the future holds in this time for queer bookstores. They said, "As a community, we are resilient, creative, and exceptionally capable of adapting to uncertainty with hope, mutual support, generosity, and, dare I say it, joy." There is a story I want to live into. It feels truer and more beautiful than the stories that end with economic disaster. The stories that say there's no other way for things to be than some folks struggling while others hoard incredible wealth. Stories that just feel like helpless despair. I want a story of hope, mutual support, generosity, and joy. A story that reminds me that until all of us are free, none of us are free. A story of determination and power and strength. The strength to bear the truth of the world. The strength to make change. Glennon Doyle writes in her book about her experience beginning to do charity work, raising money for families in need, and then her realization that, as she writes, where there is great suffering, there is often great profit. Every philanthropist, if she is paying attention, eventually becomes an activist. If we do not, we risk becoming codependent with power, saving the system's victims while the system collects the profits, then pats us on the head for our service. We are called to help each other and to change the systems. These days, many people are helping by making masks or using 3D printers to make face shields, which are wonderful things to do. And we must recognize that the shortages in personal protective equipment are the result of high-level decisions that value profits over employee safety. And it's unacceptable that the richest people should get richer while essential workers are praised as heroes but left underprotected. Many people are giving to food banks, which is absolutely necessary so that neighbors do not go hungry. And we need much better social systems in this country. Systems like universal basic income, so that an economic crisis does not mean that some households cannot get their most basic needs met. We've talked before about Joanna Macy's work and the 3 stories she sees the world offering us. The first story is business as usual, which in this case looks like people rushing to reopen states, unable to imagine any future other than returning to environmental destruction and the exploitation of the most vulnerable folks, who are low income and often people of color, who aren't able to work from home and who won't be eligible for unemployment once their non-essential businesses have been reopened by the state. This story, I notice, stands in stark contrast to the behavior of Australia and New Zealand, countries that have gone beyond flattening the curve and all the way into squashing it, demonstrating that when people choose to trust science and care about the collective good, this pandemic can be contained, not by going back to business as usual, but by making the small sacrifices required to keep all of us healthy. The second story, The Great Unraveling, sees the pieces of the world that are falling apart. The rollbacks of environmental protection that the Trump administration has perpetrated during this crisis, and the failure to offer the kind of social safety net that other countries have created. A safety net like that being used in the United Kingdom, Denmark, and France, where the government has simply funded between 70 and 90% of the payroll expenses of every company that needs it, so that people are not becoming unemployed during this time of sheltering at home. The story of The Great Unraveling sees the losses, knows that they are unacceptable and undeniable, but still treats them as inevitable, as though things will only continue to unravel in the United States and so many other places, and there's nothing to be done about it. The third story, The Great Turning, Joanna Macy describes as held and embodied by those who know the first story is leading us to catastrophe and who refuse to let the second story have the last word. Involving the emergence of new and creative human responses, it is about the epical transition from an industrial society committed to economic growth to a life-sustaining society committed to the healing and recovery of our world. This massive interruption, this great pause we find ourselves in, is proof that we as a global society are capable of huge responses to the problems of our world. We have the capacity to drastically shift our ways of being, to decrease our environmental impact, to build systems that offer everyone basic income and health care. These things are not just theoretically possible. They are happening now. unevenly, for sure, but they are happening. Like the ancient story of the Israelites, freed from slavery in Egypt after the Passover story, but now wandering the desert and perhaps longing for the familiar bounds of that enslaved past. We find ourselves now living a story that involves uncertainty and confusion and no clear answers about what exactly is coming next. It's understandable that the longing for the familiar will rise up, that some part of us may want to forget what we've learned about oppression and the unsustainable habits of so many people's ways of life, including ours. But we cannot let ourselves ever unknow what we know. We know so much more now about what is possible. We keep learning more and more about how we can be together. It is daunting to think of recreating the world on this scale. It's scary. It won't be easy. And it is exciting. It is time to live into a new story. About a year ago, I heard the Mamu's song, "We Shall Be Known," for the first time. It was the recessional at the ordination of my friend Janet in the UU congregation on Martha's Vineyard. A recessional song traditionally gives time for all the gathered clergy to go to the back of the sanctuary, and then the song ends so that the newly ordained minister can give a benediction. But at Janet's ordination, we just kept singing. All of us, clergy, congregation, choir, singing and crying. We were so touched by the promise of those words. And then last June, at the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly, I sang in the Religious Professionals Choir, and our director looked at the group of us, mostly ministers, and said, "Is there something going on with this song? Because all of a sudden, everyone wants to sing it in every worship service." The song was, "We Shall Be Known." It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. May it be so. Please join with me in singing hymn number 317, "We Are Not Our Own."
We are not our own, earth forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, earth names us, past and present, peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care. Let us be a living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
At this time, please join in extinguishing your chalice or candle or tapping to put out that flame on the Worship Web app to symbolize the close of our time of worship. We remember that these flames of the truer, more beautiful world remain with us. And now, please join me in singing our benediction.
With our minds and our hearts and our hands, may we choose to bless the world. With our minds and our hearts and our hands, may we choose to bless the world.
Thank you for sharing this time with me today. In these moments, may you bless the world by washing your hands, staying home so that you do not participate in spreading germs, advocating for those who need it and offering to share what you have, accepting help when you need it, and caring for the flame of possibility, which is always with us. Be well. I love you.